In the middle of a typical day, a McDonald's in the city center was filled with the sounds of orders, children laughing and trays clattering. People stood in line, patiently waiting for their turn, looking at menus or flipping through their phones. Amidst this bustle, there was a man standing at the very end of the line. He was a middle-aged, visibly overweight man dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans that were a bit tight on his physique. His appearance did not seem to stand out from the crowd, but his timid movements and attempts to avoid eye contact indicated that he did not feel comfortable in this crowded place. This man was Jack, a man who had faced years of judgment and criticism because of his appearance. Jack was an affable and kind person, but years of living with overweight and related health issues had taken their toll. He felt like he was the object of stares and comments, even in normal situations, such as going to fast food today. It was difficult for him to overcome these moments, but hunger and fatigue overcame his shyness. The line moved slowly, and Jack finally approached the cash register. The young cashier, a guy in his 20s, reacted quickly to Jack's appearance. At first his face was neutral, but when he noticed the man's physique, he could barely hide his smile. Jack began to order, but his words were interrupted by a sarcastic comment from the cashier, spoken loudly enough for the people in line to hear. The cashier's words were disguised as a joke, but their subtext was obvious, mocking Jack's appearance. The crowd in the restaurant began to turn their heads in their direction. Someone pretended not to notice. Someone exchanged smiles with a neighbor, supporting the cashier's tone. Jack tilted his head, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. His hands were shaking as he clutched his wallet. He was used to this kind of treatment, but it didn't make it any less painful. Every word the cashier said hit his self-esteem like a hammer on glass. The situation continued to escalate. The cashier began to add more and more sarcasm, and his behavior attracted more and more attention from customers. None of the people present intervened. Some turned away, pretending not to hear, while others watched with interest to see how the scene would end. But no one stood up to defend Jack. This silent crowd was a reflection of the indifference that is so common in the world. At that time, there was a man standing in line who was watching what was happening. It was Keanu Reeves. He came into McDonald's to grab a quick bite to eat between work meetings. Dressed in a dark jacket and jeans, he looked modest, but his presence still attracted attention. At first, he wasn't going to stay long, but the scene in front of him made him change his plans. Keanu has always been a man who could not pass by injustice. He saw how the cashier continued to abuse the man, how Jack tried to remain invisible, and how the other customers watched in silence. Indignation boiled in his heart. It was a situation he could not ignore. Jack, meanwhile, tried to complete the order as quickly as possible. His voice became quieter and his movements more nervous. He already regretted coming here and thought about just walking out, but his hunger and desire to avoid even more attention kept him in place. Every minute in this line seemed like an eternity. Keanu continued to observe the situation. He realized that the moment when he had to intervene was approaching. His calm and balanced character usually kept him at a distance from conflicts, but this time he could not stand aside. His moral principles and deep sense of empathy compelled him to act. The situation at the cash register reached its peak. The cashier made another comment, this time directed at Jack's order, indicating that he was probably ordering too much food. The crowd began to laugh muffled. Jack lowered his head even lower, his shoulders tensed, and he looked like he was about to cry. Keanu took a step forward. His determination was evident in every movement. This moment was a turning point. In a room filled with indifference, there was a man who decided that he would not let injustice prevail. Jack, without knowing what exactly was happening, felt the atmosphere in the room begin to change. Something important was about to happen, and he was on the verge of seeing it. When Keanu stepped forward, everyone in the line took notice. His calm but decisive manner drew stares, even from those who were trying to avoid the situation. He didn't look angry or aggressive, but there was a power in his eyes that made even the cashier instantly silent. It was the moment when the atmosphere in the room changed, as if the air became thicker with tension. Jack, standing at the cash register, did not immediately realize what was happening. His head was down, and he avoided making eye contact with the people around him. All he could think about was how to complete his order as quickly as possible and get out of this place where every look seemed judgmental. But when he noticed that the cashier was no longer speaking and that the room was quiet, he looked up. What he saw surprised him. There was a man standing in front of him who looked confident and yet calm. He didn't say a word, but his presence spoke for itself. Jack felt a wave of relief that was hard to explain. It was the very support he needed at that moment. Keanu looked at the cashier, and he immediately realized that he had crossed the line. His previously cocky smile disappeared, and his eyes began to dart nervously. He realized that this man was not just another customer, and that his behavior was now in question. He tried to justify himself, but the words stuck in his throat. Keanu didn't say a word, but his silent condemnation was much more powerful than any words. The other customers who had been standing aside began to feel the change in mood. Some of them, seeing Keanu's determination, turned their attention back to the cashier and began exchanging quiet comments with each other. One of the men in the line nodded in approval, supporting Keanu's action. This was the beginning of a small but important shift in the group dynamic. Indifference began to change to support. Jack, who was still standing at the cash register, felt a wave of emotions roll over him. He was not used to someone standing up for him. His life was full of moments when he was left alone with his difficulties. But this situation was different. For the first time in a long time, he felt that someone saw him as a person, not just an object of ridicule. The cashier, realizing that his behavior had caused a negative reaction, tried to change the subject and complete Jack's order. But it didn't matter anymore. The moment he crossed the line left a mark in the minds of everyone present. The silence in the room was palpable, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Keanu turned his attention to Jack. His gaze was warm and supportive. He didn't want to make the situation even more awkward for this man, but he also realized that it was important to make him feel supported. Jack felt that look, and for the first time in a long time was able to raise his head. He looked at Keanu with a gratitude that spoke more than any words. After Jack had finished his order and stepped aside, Keanu went to the cash register. The cashier, still recovering from the tension, quickly filled his order, trying to avoid direct eye contact. Keanu didn't say anything to the cashier, but his silent condemnation remained in the air even after he walked away from the counter. After receiving his order, Keanu found Jack sitting at one of the tables in the corner of the restaurant. He approached him and sat down at the next table without violating his personal space. Jack looked surprised but did not feel threatened. This moment was a reminder to him that there are still people in the world who are not afraid to intervene when they see injustice. That day was the beginning of change, not only for Jack but for everyone who witnessed the situation. People in the line saw how one person can change the atmosphere and remind us of the importance of humanity. The cashier, although he looked upset, also seemed to realize the error of his ways. Jack felt a little differently when he left the restaurant that day. His usual feeling of loneliness and judgment was replaced by something new, a feeling that he had support. Keanu, returning to his business, realized that this moment was only the beginning. He saw that this man needed not only protection from ridicule, but also support in other aspects of his life. He had a plan in his heart to help Jack find a way to a better life, and he was determined to see it through. After the incident at McDonald's, Keanu Reeves felt that he couldn't just put it behind him. He realized that defending himself in the moment was important, but it didn't address the deeper issues Jack was facing. Now he wanted to do more than just intervene in the conflict. It was important for him to understand this man's story and find a way to help him in the long run. Keanu took a moment to approach Jack as he was finishing his meal. He didn't want to violate the man's personal space, so he approached him carefully, offering his company with a gesture. Jack hesitated a bit, but eventually nodded, allowing Keanu to sit down at his table. Their initial contact was filled with a little tension, as Jack was not used to attention, especially from a public figure like Keanu. Jack looked like a man who was carrying a heavy load on his shoulders. His eyes betrayed the fatigue and sadness that had accumulated over the years of struggle with judgment and his own inner experiences. Keanu, with his calm and friendly nature, gradually helped him open up. They started talking, and Jack shared his story. Jack was an ordinary man who had been struggling with his weight all his life. His health problems began in his teens, and despite numerous attempts to change the situation, he kept failing. On top of that, his overweight became the object of constant ridicule, which undermined his self-esteem. Jack described how he faced judgment and felt isolated for years. However, he also shared that he had always wanted to take back control of his life, but didn't know where to start. Keanu listened attentively without interrupting. His sympathy was genuine, and he could see that Jack needed not only moral support, but also practical help. He began to think about how he could help Jack take the first steps toward change. His goal was not only to solve the current problem, but also to help Jack find the strength and resources to move forward on his own. After this meeting, Keanu decided to take action. He reached out to his friends in the health, nutrition, and fitness industry. His network of contacts included top professionals who were ready to help as soon as they heard about the situation. He explained to them that he wanted to give Jack access to the resources he needed, from medical advice to support in developing a healthy lifestyle. One of Keanu's first initiatives was to ensure that Jack had a consultation with a nutritionist. He organized a meeting with a specialist who specialized in working with people who had similar issues. During the consultation, the nutritionist not only created an individualized nutrition plan, but also explained to Jack how to gradually change his habits without feeling pressured or guilty. This was the first step that gave Jack a sense of control over his life. The next step was physical activity. Keanu agreed to work with a trainer who specialized in working with overweight people. The trainer developed a program that included easy exercises for beginners and a gradual increase in the load. Jack started working out in a small private studio where he could feel comfortable and not be judged by other people. Within a few weeks, Jack began to notice changes. His body became stronger and his energy level increased. But the biggest changes were happening inside him. He began to feel that his life had value and that he was capable of overcoming difficulties. The support he received from Keanu and working with professionals became a source of inspiration for him. In addition to working on his physical health, Keanu helped Jack find psychological support. He arranged for him to meet with a therapist who helped Jack deal with the emotional effects of years of judgment and isolation. This therapy helped him see himself in a different light and find new strength to fight. While working on his health, Jack also began to develop new interests. He began to spend more time cooking, discovering healthy recipes that were not only healthy, but also delicious. His new knowledge became the basis for changes in his life, which occurred gradually but surely. For Keanu, this story was a reminder that even a small action can change someone's fate. He saw Jack start to believe in himself, and it gave him confidence that he had chosen the right path. Keanu continued to support Jack, but at the same time, try to help him gain independence so that he could move forward on his own. This part of the story was the beginning of a new chapter in Jack's life. He had not yet achieved all of his goals, but he now had a plan and support to help him move forward. His journey was not easy, but he was ready to take on the challenge. And all of this was made possible by one moment of kindness that changed everything. A few weeks passed since Jack started working on himself. His life, which had previously seemed locked in an endless cycle of judgment, low self-esteem, and isolation, began to change. These changes were gradual, but they had a profound impact on him. It had all started with the support he received from Keanu Reeves, but now Jack was beginning to take control of his life. The first month was the hardest. He had to change his habits that had been accumulating for years. Under the guidance of a nutritionist, Jack gradually began to switch to a healthier diet. Giving up junk food and trying to find a balance between taste and health was a challenge. However, each healthy meal he prepared was a small victory. He began to realize that these changes were not just a diet, but a new way of life. Jack also started moving more. His workouts with the trainer were adapted to his fitness level. At first, it was simple exercises, walking on a treadmill, light stretches, and basic strength exercises. Jack was amazed at how even such small changes in physical activity could affect his health. He felt that he was getting stronger and more resilient. His coach kept encouraging him, reminding him that every step counts. In addition to physical changes, Jack started working on his mental health. Sessions with a therapist helped him understand how years of judgment and humiliation had affected his self-esteem. Therapy gave him the tools to overcome negative thoughts and taught him to accept himself for who he is. Jack began to notice that his thoughts were changing. Instead of focusing on his shortcomings, he began to pay attention to his achievements. Among the achievements that impressed Jack the most was his ability to gradually incorporate new hobbies into his life. One of these was cooking. He started experimenting with different recipes, finding healthy alternatives to his favorite dishes. It was not only a practical activity, but also a way to express himself. Jack even started keeping a cooking diary, where he wrote down his recipes and impressions. Keanu Reeves continued to support Jack, but he did so unobtrusively. He understood that Jack had to find his own way and learn to overcome challenges on his own. Keanu would sometimes call or text to see how he was doing. These simple gestures reminded Jack that he was not alone on this journey. The changes in Jack's life also began to affect his social interactions. He began to socialize more with other people, especially during his studio sessions. He noticed that his new friends were not judgmental, but supportive. These relationships helped him feel part of a community where he was accepted for who he was. In addition to physical and social changes, Jack started to think about his career. He used to work in an office, but his insecurities and the judgment of his co-workers made him feel out of place. Now that his self-esteem has begun to strengthen, he has begun to think about what he would really like to do. One day, during a session with his therapist, he remembered that he had always loved working with his hands. This thought gave him an idea. He decided to try his hand at a craft. Jack enrolled in a woodworking course in his town. It was something completely new to him, but he was full of enthusiasm. Working with wood became for him not only a source of new knowledge, but also a way to find inner peace. He started creating simple but beautiful things like shelves, photo frames, and even furniture. His products became a symbol of how far he had come in his journey to a new life. Jack's environment began to change as well. His family noticed how he was changing and supported him in all his endeavors. People who had previously been indifferent to him began to see him as more than just an overweight man. They began to appreciate him as a person with dreams, goals, and the strength to achieve them. At the end of 2 months on his journey, Jack decided to do something special. He organized a small meeting for the people who had supported him along the way. It was a moment when he could share his achievements and thank those who believed in him. Keanu was among those invited. He was excited to come to this meeting, seeing how far Jack had come. This part of Jack's journey was proof that change is possible when you have support and determination. His life wasn't perfect yet, but he felt he was heading in the right direction. And all of this was made possible by a chance encounter at McDonald's that changed not only his day, but his life. As Jack completed his first 2 months of change, his life began to take on a new meaning. It was no longer a life of living in the shadow of other people's judgment and his own insecurities. Now it was a story about the power of the human spirit, support, and a second chance. But the most interesting thing was that his transformation had a domino effect, touching the lives of others. The community around Jack began to change their attitudes not only toward him, but toward others as well. His acquaintances, friends, and even people who had only met him once began to think about how they treated others and how their words and actions could affect others. Jack's story has become a reminder to many about the importance of empathy and kindness. Jack decided that his experience and achievements should become a platform for helping others. He began sharing his story on social media, where he talked about his journey, challenges, and victories. His posts quickly became popular, receiving hundreds of comments and support from people around the world. People wrote to him about how his example inspired them to start their own journey of change. One day, Jack received an invitation to speak at a local event dedicated to healthy living. It was a conference that brought together nutritionists, fitness trainers, psychologists, and other professionals. Jack, hesitant at first, agreed. He realized that his story could inspire others. On stage, he shared his experience, explaining how important it is to have support and faith in yourself. His speech received a standing ovation, and after the event, many people came up to him, thanking him for his sincerity. After that, the conference was just the beginning of his public activities. Jack began to work with local organizations that supported people with overweight and other problems. He helped organize meetings, supported newcomers, and shared practical advice. His friendliness and understanding made him a natural leader in this area. Keanu Reeves, who closely observed the changes in Jack's life, remained his constant supporter. They continued to communicate, and Keanu was happy to see Jack getting stronger not only physically but also mentally. At one of their joint events, Keanu publicly noted that it is stories like Jack's that remind him why he always strives to help others. His words were another confirmation of the importance of support and kindness. Jack also decided to do something special for other people who face similar difficulties. He started raising funds to create a small rehabilitation center in his town. This center was to be a place where people could get support, counseling, and access to professionals to help them on their journeys to change. Thanks to the support of Keanu and many others, this project quickly began to materialize. One day, when the center was already up and running, Jack gave a tour to local residents. It was the moment he realized how far he had come in his life. He was no longer the person who felt isolated and unworthy. Now he was an example that even the most difficult challenges can be overcome if you don't give up and get the right support. Jack and Keanu's story went viral, with photos and stories of them together appearing in the news and on social media. But instead of being just a headline hero, Jack used his popularity to draw attention to important topics such as discrimination, health, and mental support. He became a voice for those who were afraid to talk about their difficulties. McDonald's, where the incident took place, also learned from it. After the story went public, the company conducted an internal investigation and launched training programs for its employees. Now, the chain's restaurants paid more attention to respecting customers and creating a friendly atmosphere. Jack was even invited to speak to employees at one of these programs to share his experience and emphasize the importance of humanity. At the end of the second month, Jack felt that his life had changed forever. He no longer looked at himself through the prism of other people's judgment. Now he saw himself as a strong, confident person who was able to change not only his life, but also the lives of others. His example became a source of inspiration for many, and he knew that this was only the beginning of his journey. This story left a deep mark not only on Jack's life, but also on the hearts of everyone who was a part of it. It reminded us that kindness, support, and compassion can change the world. Sometimes it only takes one brave act, like Keanu Reeves' intervention that day in the line. But it's moments like that that are the beginning of great change.